Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ZJLF at the British Library Knowledge Centre Theatre. We are delighted to introduce this session, White Mughals. Please ensure that your phones are on silent and there is no flash photography in the venue. Please welcome Katherine Schofield.
In 1691, the Mughal poet Sher Khan Lodi wrote that it is impossible to capture the essence of music in pen and ink on the surface of the page. Once the last note has passed into silence, once the bells around the dancing foot are finally stilled, music is gone forever and cannot be recaptured, like life. All we are left with, Sher Khan wrote, are the sibilant scratches of a broken pen. Fast forward 108 years to 1799 to Hyderabad and a famous Nach performance at which the most captivating and celebrated courtesan of the 18th century, Mah Laqa Bai Chanda, thrust a copy of her fabled songs into the hands of an East India Company official, John Malcolm, as she danced and span and turned her liquid black eyes upon him. Roll forward a further 218 years to this place, and this time, that little book of songs, and in fact many other lyrics from that time and place, now lie here in the British Library. The voices of Mah Laqa Bai, of John Malcolm, of all those who lived and loved in the world of the White Mughals, are now forgotten, their limbs long crumbled to dust. Only written traces remain, lying still on the page, laid out in silent, scribbled lines. The question is, can Orpheus ever bring Eurydice back from the dead? If there is anyone who can, thank you. If there is anyone who can bring something of that long, quiet world of the White Mughals back to life, it is Vidya Shah and William Dalrymple. Vidya Shah is, thank you. Many of you will have heard her sing already. She is a wonderful singer. She is an author. Her most recent book, Jalsa, tells the story of the first women of the early gramophone recordings in India. She is an accomplished and trained singer in both northern and southern classical styles, and we are delighted to have her sing and to welcome her musicians as well to the stage tonight or this afternoon. William Dalrymple, as everybody always says, needs no introduction to this or really any other audience, but he is a writer, a traveller, a historian, a prize-winning author whose books have been read by millions. But as myself, a Mughal cultural historian, I want to testify to the importance of his work in the world of academic scholarship. He has taken, over the past 15 years or so, a rather neglected but critically important corner of Indian history, the transition from the late Mughal to early colonial worlds, and made it come back to life for us. So for the first time in over 200 years, along with other lyrics of some of the great songwriters and poets, together they are going to perform some of the lyrics of Mah Laqa Bai and others and bring them back to life for us insofar as is possible in the place in which some of the books that hold these songs are laid to rest. So I'm very excited to hear what they have in store for us as they sing the lives of the White Mughals. And I am delighted to introduce to you Vidya Shah and William Dalrymple. Thank you.
Namaskar. Good afternoon. This afternoon, as we celebrate the beauty of the Deccan, I begin with a poem by a celebrated king from that part of our country in India, Quli Qutb Shah, only to set stage for the beautiful poetry that Dakkani was all about. And in this, Qutb Shah says, I can't bear to live without my love, even for a moment. And he describes that moment as tiny as that mole on her cheek. Piya baaj pyala jiya jaye na. Ijazat. पिया बाज प्याला जिया जाए ना पिया बाज प्याला पिया जाए ना पिया बाज यक दिल जिया जाए ना पिया बाज प्याला पिया जाए ना हाँ पिया बाज यक दिल रहा जाए ना नहीं इश्क जिस वो बड़ा कूड़ है नहीं इश्क वो बड़ा कूड़ है कदियों से मिल बेसिया जाए ना कदियों से मिल बेसिया जाए ना कुतुब शाह ना दे मुझ दीवाने को कुतुब शाह ना दे मुझ दीवाने दीवाने को कुछ पान दिया जाए ना पिया बाज प्याला पिया जाए ना
In the next hour, we are going to be celebrating both the culture of the Deccan region of India and a particular story of how, in that place, a particular love affair took place between a British official, James Achilles Kirkpatrick, who was the resident at the court of Hyderabad, and the great niece of the Prime Minister of Hyderabad, who was called Khairuunisa Begum. I'm going to start, however, perhaps in a slightly unusual place by reading a letter by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, who visited Hyderabad in 1984. And she wrote a letter afterwards to the art historian Mark Zebrowski, who'd been one of the very first people to really celebrate and highlight the extraordinary artistic world of the Deccan, all the stuff which had been produced there in the many different Deccani courts, had often been slightly in the shadow of what had been going on in North India at the time of the Mughals. And Mark, in 1982, produced an extraordinary book called Deccani Art, which brought together in beautiful piece of art historical publication the different the works of the different sultanates. Jackie Onassis, then preparing for a big India show in New York, went and did a tour of the different Deccan kingdoms. And this was the letter she wrote to Mark Zabrowski afterwards. I never knew what the Deccan was, just large letters in the middle of the map of India. We had an evening I will never forget with the old noblemen of the Nizam's court. Men with long white hands, transparent like alabaster. They recited Urdu poetry. One of them, a former ambassador, still sends me translations of his poems in English. The hereditary Prime Minister of the Nizam has his own lime grove, such inbred trees that their leaves are translucent, and the pan made with them is unlike any other. To see them making it from a beautiful pandan and offering it to you. There were these three ancient classical musicians playing in the moonlight, and they, the noblemen, were speaking of how it was all disappearing, that the youth didn't appreciate the old ways of the culture. The great chefs were being taken by the Emirates. This over-civilized, rarefied world, you could feel it, but you knew it was too rarefied to survive. And you felt fortunate to be able to sense in those hours what it once had been. That evening was profoundly sad. My son John told me the next day that the sons of the house had taken him to their rooms because they couldn't stand the classical music. And they'd offer him tall glasses filled with whiskey and put on a pornographic cassette in the Betamax and the Rolling Stones on the tape deck. They wore tight Italian pants and open shirts. And all the while, their fathers on the terrace in their beautiful sherwani were speaking of how sad it made them. Ali Pasha's son had disappeared the year before on a motorbike because he didn't like the marriage which had been arranged for him. That fragmenting, decaying world that Kennedy saw in 1984 was the last fragments of a mixed Indo-Islamic, Deccani cultural universe that first came into being in the 13th century with the southern conquests of the Delhi sultans. Much that was best about it had been preserved into the 20th century, thanks to the survival in the middle of India of a large, detached fragment of the Mughal Empire. This took the form of the state of Hyderabad, much the mightiest and richest of the semi-independent Indian princely states that made up nearly a third of the Indian landmass, under the hegemony of the British Raj. Under a succession of Asif Jahi Nizams, the Hyderabad state had for over 200 years succeeded in preserving everything that had been salvaged from the wreck of Deccani civilization. So keeping alive a last flickering light of the arts and the cultural forms of Indo-Islamic civilization, which everywhere else had been eroded by the onslaught of British colonialism and then the encroaching modernism of independent India. The founder of the Hyderabad state was this man, above us now, the austere Mughal warlord Mir Kamaruddin Khan, who was awarded the title Nizam-ul-Mulk when he first became the governor of the Deccan. Nizam-ul-Mulk was a Puritan in the form of his hero Aurangzeb. He never drank or smoked, and he disapproved of showy dress. Nor was he a great enthusiast of the arts. He liked poetry and left 2 Persian language divans under the pen names Shakir and Asaf, but he had a deep suspicion of painting, music, and drinking. A close watch were kept on his nobles, and those who held illicit parties during Muharram were reported to him by his spies. Permission for dance displays and naughties had to be sought from the Durbar and was granted only on the occasions of festivals or marriages. Partly for this reason, the Nizam never saw eye to eye. This doesn't seem to be moving. Can we do it that manually, or is there a stage manager that can help us? Oh, here we go. Partly for this reason, the Nizam never saw eye to eye with his emperor, Muhammad Shah. Muhammad Shah was known as Rangila, the colourful. You can see him here doing everything that would make his great-grandfather Aurangzeb turn in the grave. He's, A, it's a painting, B, it has musicians in it, C, they're celebrating a Hindu festival, and D, they're courtesans. So it's just about everything that Aurangzeb hated most encapsulated in one picture. And it's going on in the royal palace. They're celebrating Holi, of course. And Muhammad Shah Rangila was a major patron of the arts, much underrated. It's true that much of his career was a political catastrophe with the invasion of Nader Shah, but he was the man who introduced the tabla and the sitar into court music. He was a terrific patron of the arts. He revived the Mughal ateliers we heard yesterday with that art history session. And Nizam-ul-Mulk was never going to get on with this guy. And increasingly, the Nizam forged his own path in the Deccan, doing his own thing. He said in his writings, "I hark back to the discipline of Aurangzeb. I exercise all the necessary restraint." So the Nizam initially set up a much more puritanical state in Hyderabad. And it was only under his his son, Nizam Ali Khan. Again, we're not getting this moving forward. Should we abandon these if this doesn't work? Susie or anyone, can we get a point to the slide machine that works? Here we go. Here's Nader Shah. We're getting somewhere. And more. Here's Nizam Ali Khan. I think we might have to leave it with him if we don't have any more successes. Can we have another of these, please, though? Nizam Ali Khan, in contrast, saw this interest in the arts as contrary to all the principles he'd grown up with. Nizam Ali Khan was the illegitimate younger son who came to the throne at the end of Nizam-ul-Mulk's reign in 1762. And on his succession, you had an effect similar to that of the Restoration at the period of Charles II. Suddenly, Hyderabad became the centre of all the arts which had been suppressed under his father. And he moved his capital from the old barracks town of Aurangabad to Hyderabad. This is his prime minister, Aristojar, painted by the great court artist Venkachalam. And here is the Charminar at the centre of Hyderabad, the symbol of the old city. And the troops moved and marched from Aurangabad to the new city, the newly rebuilt city of Hyderabad. This is the French mercenaries he employed. And this is Hyderabad at this period, with the Charminar in the centre and the British ambassador presenting Nizam Ali Khan with a nazar, with an offering. So under Nizam Ali Khan, the old Puritanism is thrown away, and the great revival of the arts, of language, and of literature takes place.
I'm going to go back a little bit and sing a verse from a very, very important text, the Kitab-e-Noras, set in the 16th century. This was a collection of 59 poems by a very important king, Ibrahim Adil Shah. And it's very interesting that this book, the first 3 verses, the first is dedicated to the goddess of learning, Saraswati. The second, he dedicates to the Prophet Muhammad. And the third, he dedicates to Gesu Daraz, of whom he is a disciple, a peer. So I'm going to sing as an invocation what he has written in the Kitab-e-Noras about Ganesha, or the one who removes, the god who removes the obstacles from your life. So this is from the Kitab-e-Noras, and it's Ibrahim Adil Shah's work. Although every time William talks about Muhammad Shah Rangili and what a wonderful patron he was of the arts, and he quickly adds what a disaster he was as a king, it worries me that is that the story of the patrons of culture in our country or what? Sorry. गणपति मूरत हस्त मेघ मद बरखत पानी गणपति मूरत हस्त मेघ मद बरखत पानी सरस्वती पुत्र सरस्वती पुत्र स्वत घन जल कैसे जी जानी सरस्वती पुत्र स्वत घन जल कैसे जी जानी इब्राहिम नौरस मुक्ता निकसत इब्राहिम नौरस 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 इब्राहिम नौरस मुक्ता निकसत या करण निश्चय मानी इब्राहिम नौरस मुक्ता निकसत या करण निश्चय मानी गणपति मूरत हस्त मेघ मद बरखत पानी गणपति मूरत हस्त मेघ मध गणपत हमध बरसत पानी दंत दामिनी घंट घोर 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 दंत दामिनी घंट घोर 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 मुंडन भल विदुबानी गणपति मूरत हस्त मेघ मध बरखत पानी मद बरखत पानी
So just as after the monsoon, life comes back into the landscape as the rains reach down into the roots and all the seeds beneath the surface suddenly sprout back into life. So after the death of Nizam-ul-Mulk, the final end of this period of Puritanism, under Nizam Ali Khan, you see this extraordinary revival of the arts and in music, in literature, in a whole variety of artistic forms. The old Dakkani forms going back to the time of Ibrahim Adil Shah and Quli Qutb Shah revives, and Hyderabad becomes the center of it. And Hyderabad has a huge area of central India, south central India, under its control at this period. It has greater resources to throw at it than any of the small Deccan sultanates had earlier. If Nizam-ul-Mulk had a department for the scrutiny of morals, rather like the Iranian morality police, Nizam Ali Khan had instead a department to oversee the business of dancing and music, the Daftar Arbab Inashat, the office of the Lords of Pleasure. And two of Nizam Ali Khan's leading nobles, Tajalli Ali Shah and Venkachalam, this is by Tajalli Ali Shah, and we'll see some Venkachalam in a second, were both remarkable painters. And one, Mah Laqa Bai Chanda, was a courtesan and dancer. Here is the Charminar in the center of the city, Tajalli Ali Shah, and this is the work of Venkachalam. And this shows the court of Nizam Ali Khan riding out, going hunting. And you just see in the top right-hand corner is a single woman in a palanquin. Here's Nizam Ali Khan, his Prime Minister Aristu Jah, and here is the woman in the palanquin. This is Mah Laqa Bai Chanda. And she was a celebrated poet whose works were collected as far away as Delhi and Lucknow. She built a library of books on the arts and sciences and commissioned the Mahanama, a major new history of the Deccan, of which she became an important patron of poets in her own right. Such was the Nizam's reliance on her wisdom that alone of women she was given the rank of a senior Omra, so that she could attend the Durbar and advised him on state policy. She also accompanied him to war, dressed in male clothing, and gained a reputation for her riding skills, her accomplishments with the bow, and even the javelin. This Venkachalam canvas we have in front of us shows her with the nobility of Nizam Ali Khan's court going out hunting. It's no wonder that John Malcolm, in the copy of her diwan that Catherine referred to in the introduction, calls her an extraordinary woman. This is drawing back on the old tradition of, this is a Golconda courtesan from earlier. These are pictures of the ideal of Deccan pleasure in the pleasure garden. And this is Mah Laqa, extraordinary image of her standing in this incredibly stately fashion, staring straight at the eyes of the artist, Venkachalam. Here she is playing Holi with one of her boyfriends. And these are her ghazals, which we will be hearing today, sung for the first time in 200 years in a second. And this is the introduction page of the British Library copy of her diwan. And it's written in the handwriting of James Kirkpatrick, the British resident. And it says, the Diwan of Chanda, the celebrated Mah Laqa of Hyderabad. This book was presented as a nazar from this extraordinary woman to Captain Malcolm in the midst of a dance in which she was the chief performer on the 18th of October, 1799, at the house of Mir Alam Bahadur. And I think, hang on, here we go. This is more pictures of the languid Deccan pleasure garden. So this is the world you've got to imagine Mah Laqa performing in. Here, sitting under a canopy, a woman with a veena to one side, three rather drunken ladies on the right, propping each other up on a journey. It looks like a Friday night in... hang on, I really need a new presser, please, if we can get one. This is James Achilles Kirkpatrick, and we'll come back to him in a minute. Time for Mah Laqa to be brought back from the dead.
I definitely want to join those women on that Friday night. They look like they're having so much more fun than we could imagine. So as William just mentioned, these are ghazals written by the amazing Mah Laqa. For those of you who are interested in Urdu and do engage with ghazal or the language, you will realize that it's very complex, this dialect, this form of Dakkani writing, actually. And I've read, I mean, I'm not a historian, we have amazing people here, but I do believe that Dakkani Urdu has influenced what we celebrate or speak as Urdu in today's world. And somewhere along the way, we seem to have lost the beauty of the leza or the lilt that it has. These are some new compositions, so unlike normally what Indian musicians do, I'm going to be holding it up and singing so that I don't do injustice to the beautiful Dakkani of Mah Laqa Bai's. And in this one, William just shared a beautiful slide where she was celebrating Holi. So I chose to sing this one, which celebrates spring, around when Holi also happens. And so she talks about a resplendent spring and how everybody's getting together to celebrate. And she uses the word mauj, which basically means fun. So that's Mah Laqa for you. बसंत आई है मौज रंगे गुल है जोशो सबा है बसंत आई है मौज रंगे गुल है जोश सबा है खुदा के फजल से ऐशो चंदा को आने करम से है सदा उम्मीद चंदा को किसी की भी न हो मोहताज तुमसे ये तमन्ना है किसी की भी न हो मोहताज तुमसे ये तमन्ना है हाँ बसंत आई है हाँ मौजे गुल है जोश है सबा
Just as the Deccan was emerging into this new artistic renaissance, Hyderabad state formed an alliance with the East India Company, this extraordinary multinational corporation which had turned itself into a political, an aggressive military machine that was both trading with India, governing as a kind of occupying force, first in Bengal, then down the coast. What's fascinating, though, is that when the first British residents used to arrive in the great Mughal capitals like Lucknow and Delhi and then Hyderabad, you didn't get the usual pattern of the colonials imposing their culture on the colonized, but the reverse. It was as if the current of colonialism had been switched. And you find the British residents becoming so enamored of the court culture, the Mah Laqas, these extraordinary painters, these great poets, that they take on the ways of the great Mughal courts. And this was something that happened not just in Hyderabad, but across India. And it goes particularly from the period of about 1780 to about 1820, 1830. It's about 50 years. When it becomes very common. And if you look at the wills of the company officials, which again are here at the British Library, one of the rules was that because so many died in India, most never came home. And because so many died in India, they had to have a copy of their will sent back to England. And they're all here in these great big leather-bound ledgers. And if you go through these, as I have done, you can get statistics. And they're in 5-year volumes, so 1780 to 1785, 1 in 3 British men is leaving all his goods in his will to either an Indian woman or an Anglo-Indian child by an Indian woman. So an amazing amount of intermarriage is going on at this period. The pictures, this is Khairuunisa, the young princess with whom James Kirkpatrick fell in love. And here is Kirkpatrick, as you see, wearing Indian dress, not looking completely at ease in this sort of nice Fab India collection that he's modelling. But the inscription on the back says it was commissioned by Mir Alam, who again was the person that at whose house the dance display was held. But he was by no means, here he is watching a dance display, the same character with a little flower in his hand. But he was not alone. Across India at this time, you find picture after picture of these slightly odd-looking white chaps dressed in a variety of outfits. This is one of my favourites. This is Sir David Ochterlony, also in the British Library collection, modelling perhaps a Rohit Bal kurta. And he's got his dancing girls around him, exactly the way you should imagine a man who had no less than 13 Indian wives, each of whom had her own elephant. And every evening they would do a wonderful tour around the Red Fort and then come back for an evening of fun and games like this. And what I love best is the pictures of the outraged Scottish ancestors peering down, wondering what's happened to Ur Devi after a few years in the Indian sun. No trace of a kilt there. Though you can see there is a rather kilted and plumed Highland regiment to the top left. Grandad would have disapproved. And this is the seal of David Ochterlony, who liked to be known by his Mughal title, Naziruddin. And very few people in Nazirabad in Rajasthan perhaps realise that their town is named after a Scots Bostonian. And this is his tomb, which sadly was destroyed in 1857, but again is a measure of the surprise of this period, because here you have a building which, as you can see, is forested with minarets. But if you look carefully at the top of the central dome, it has a cross on top. Possibly the only building in history where the minaret and the cross cohabit quite so intimately. This is a man called Archibald Seton, who you can see writing happily at his Delhi residency table. He was Ochterlony's successor. And this is Ochterlony's young assistant, William Fraser, who commissioned the Fraser album. Now watch what happens to William Fraser. This is him painted by Raeburn in Edinburgh on his way out. He must be about 16 years old, 15 and a half, with that slightly snotty look of the entitled aristocrat curling his upper lip. But watch what happens when he arrives in Bengal. Here we go. He's still got his Scottish hat on. And keep looking at that, because the hat will remain in another feature, but everything else is getting a bit awry. He's now wearing a full sort of Mughal angurka, and in his hand he's got calligraphy pens. So he's been busy doing Urdu calligraphy. Here he is now modelling for Tarrant Hiliani in this continued display of fashion wonders. Keep watching the facial hair as it morphs during the succession of pictures. Here we go. He's on the left of this. On the right is Ghalib's cousin, Ahmed Baksh Khan, in this picture. And here he is. I have another version of this picture where he's wearing the same hunting hat as before, but here he seems to be doing a what's the word called? A casting act for Pirates of the Caribbean. They're trying to step in for Captain Jack Sparrow at his dining room table, and he got his. This is the final image of the set with his facial hair finally having done some completely strange thing. And he had a whole Indian family. This is his wife, Amiban, and their son, who's known variously as Feroz Khan or Charles Ian Fraser, depending whether he's in British or in Mughal company. These are the dancing girls of James Skinner, very much part of this world. This is exactly the sort of musicians who would have been playing for Mah Laqa in Hyderabad, but this is actually the beginning of the year. Every day afterwards, it became more publicly spoken of and universally believed until the period of the complaint. And so on and forth. We get this very detailed grilling of these men about what had happened, what was going on in his bedroom, who had seduced who. And Kirkpatrick, however, uses the closeness that he has to this family to be able to pull off the extraordinary treaty of 1802, which is the one that binds Hyderabad to the British and which kept the Hyderabad state intact until 1948, a year after independence. And what you find is Nizam and trusts Kirkpatrick. So Kirkpatrick is here. Khairuunisa and he marry according to Muslim law. We have the marriage contract surviving in the Kirkpatrick files here in the British Library. He converted to Islam quietly to marry her. And sooner or later, they had, within a few years, they had 2 children, who were known as Sab Alam and Sab Begum, later to be known as Kitty and William Kirkpatrick. And here they are painted by the artist Chinnery. Now, all this was like a red rag to bull to this man, the Duke of Wellington's elder brother, Lord Wellesley, who was the most aggressive of the East India Company Governor-Generals and who conquered more of India than Napoleon conquered of Europe. And anyway, Kirkpatrick uses his closeness to the Nizam to get the Nizam to build him a little pad in the centre of town. And this is it. This is the Hyderabad Residency, arguably the most magnificent British colonial building in South or Central India. Just recently been restored with an anonymous gift from Britain of £1 million. And this extraordinary and utterly beautiful Palladian mansion. But what's wonderful is that behind this facade of British power and classical architecture, Kirkpatrick, incidentally, it's exactly the same date and floor plan as the White House in Washington. Long before a certain Mr. Trump moved into this building, rather more attractive characters, but also one with red hair. Kitty was famous for her bright red hair in the life. This is the East India Company Arms above the residency, a beautiful Robert Adams-style staircase at the back, modelled on Hume House in London. But at the back is another palace built for Khairuunisa, the Hindustani house, the Rang Mahal, painted with murals by Venkachalam. And it is here, in the ruins of this building, that the 2 children grow up. And the 2 children are sent off to England. Kirkpatrick lives this extraordinary double life for several years. By day, the British resident in his company outfit. By night, in his Hindustani pajamas with his wife and his Shia Muslim children. It's only when he's sent off to Calcutta and becomes ill that this whole idyll disintegrates. But it has a final chapter which we'll tell in 1 minute. So one last. We have 5 minutes. So. Okay, well, maybe I'll move forward to, so we'll have one, we're running out of time, so I will read to you. So the children are sent off to England. Kirkpatrick dies in Calcutta. His wife, Khairuunisa, has a long period of mourning and then falls in love with another British guy called Russell. But he's a much lesser man. The period is changing. Russell seduces her, but then dumps her. In a coastal town called Masulipatam, where she catches a fever and dies, aged only 21. The children, however, grow up in England, and through a chance meeting, Kitty is invited to tea as a young adult, aged 21, in a large country house in Berkshire called Swallowfield, walks in and finds there that picture we saw a minute ago by Chinnery. She's been invited to tea by local people, and they take her to see the Grand House. And, of course, it's her in her youth. And she's, by chance, walked into the house of the man who seduced her mother, then snaffled the portrait, this wicked Russell character. Anyway, she then starts researching her past and finds that her grandmother, who'd arranged the original liaison between Kirkpatrick and Khairuunisa, is still alive in a harem in Hyderabad. And the book ends with this extraordinary correspondence between these 2 women who are separated by as much as nature can possibly throw at a couple. One is Kitty, living in the South Coast, has been tutored by the young Thomas Carlyle, is an evangelical Christian, married to a general in the Hussars, and is living in a villa in Torquay. Her grandmother is a Shia Muslim living in a harem in Hyderabad, writing in caritas in Urdu on gilt-flecked paper. But these two carry on a wonderful correspondence. Both of them remember each other. Both of them have lost and loved the mother, who was the woman who joined them both. And this, after a gap of 30 years, is the letter that Kitty writes to her grandmother in Hyderabad when she's reconnected to her. Again, it's in the British Library. My dear grandmother, I often think of you and remember you and my dear mother. I often dream that I am with you in India and that I see you both in the room you used to sit in. No day of my life has ever passed without my thinking of my dear mother. I can remember the veranda and the place where the tailors worked, and a place on the housetop where my mother used to let me sit down and slide. When I dream of my mother, I am in such joy to have found her again that I awake, or else I am pained in finding that I cannot understand the English she now speaks. I now speak. I can well recollect her cries when we left her, and I can see the place where she sat when we parted, and her tearing her long hair. What worlds I would give to possess one lock of that beautiful and much-loved hair. How dreadful to think that so many, many years have passed when it would have done my heart such good to think that you loved me. And when I longed to write to tell you, and tell you these feelings that I was never able to express, a letter which I'm sure would have been detained by my uncle. And now, how wonderful it is, after 35 years, that I'm able for the first time to hear that you think of me and love me, and have perhaps wondered why I did not write to you, and that you have thought me cold and insensible to such near, dear ties. I thank God that He has opened the way for making the feelings of my heart known to you. Will this letter reach you? And will you care for the letter of your grandchild? My own heart tells me that you will. May God bless you, my own dear grandmother.
So I finished this afternoon with two verses of Mah Laqa's poem, which, 2 lines actually, we don't have so much time, it's done the whole poem, where she basically says कि दिल में मेरे फिर ख्याल आता है आज. The same thought comes to my mind again. And what is this thought? कोई दिलबर बेमिसाल आता है आज. That there is this beautiful lover, this incredible lover, who I, for some reason, think of today. But I also finish with a more contemporary Dakkani poet, early 20th century, Makhdoom Mohyuddin, who writes a beautiful poem on the idea, it's a metaphor really, on memories, on a sense of loss, on a sense of longing. Pretty much, I think, what we felt with what you shared. So. Sure what happened to my Tanpura, but anyway. हाँ दिल में मेरे फिर ख्याल आता है हाँ दिल में मेरे फिर रात भर आपकी याद आती रही। रात भर दर्द की शम्मा जलती रही। रात भर दर्द की शम्मा जलती रही। गम की लौ थरथराती रही। रात भर गम की लौ थरथराती रही। याद की चांद दिल में उतरती रही। याद की चांद दिल में उतरती रही। चांदनी डगमगाती रही। रात भर चांदनी डगमगाती रही। रात भर आपकी